You're listening to the Music Tech Teacher Podcast, episode number 6. Welcome to the Music Tech Teacher Podcast. Music tech tips, lesson ideas, advice, news, and interviews, especially for music teachers. Brought to you by midnightmusic.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Music Tech Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Wardrobe, a music tech presenter, speaker and consultant based in Melbourne, Australia, and I'd really like to thank you for listening today. In episode 4, I talked about 19 different ways that you can just use one iPad in music education, and I wanted to follow that up today with some ideas for just using a single computer with your students. If you'd like to go back and listen to episode 4, I'll link to that in the show notes for this episode, which you can find at midnightmusic.com.au/6. I know that some of you don't have constant access to multiple devices that students can use hands-on in the classroom, which means that a lot of the time you're just working with your own laptop. Now, I don't think that's such a bad thing all the time. There are still some great things that you can do with students and just your single laptop. What's really useful though is if you have access to a data projector so that you can easily share your screen with the whole class, because it really opens up what you can do with your one laptop as an activity. And because we're going to be talking about music websites and software, of course, you'll need to also be able to plug into speakers so that your students can hear everything clearly. If you don't actually have access even to a data projector to allow the entire class to see your screen, you might like to try some of the ideas that I'm going to talk about today as one of a number of rotational activities for students who might be working individually or in groups. Your laptop could become one station or centre in the group, and so a group of students might go up to that and do one of these activities and then move on to something else like playing or a notation activity or something different there. So I'm going to talk through 15 different ways you can use your one laptop. Now, if you're walking or driving or doing something else while you're listening to this, don't worry. I have the list written down for you, which includes all of the links that I'll mention. You can download the list at the show notes page I mentioned earlier. So that link is midnightmusic.com.au/6. So let's get started with our 15 ways. Now, the first way is one that you're probably doing already, and that's to show music videos that you find on YouTube to your entire class. There are some fantastic, clever music videos on YouTube, and they show lots of different things. People doing really creative musical activities, things that are engaging. Of course, you can show things like instruments of the orchestra, people doing clever arrangements or cover versions of songs that students will know. I have ended up collecting a whole stack of these on my Pinterest account. So if you're interested in checking that out, I'll link to that in the show notes. And there are just some great things in there. I actually love going to this Pinterest board and just watching some of them at random times. It reminds me of ones that I may have not watched for some time. It's a great way to entice students to get quickly to class. If they know perhaps that at the beginning of every class you're going to show one of these clever music videos. I do know a teacher that's done that in the past, and it's meant that their students have been getting to class really quickly on time so they don't miss out on the video that gets played. If you're not on Pinterest and you do want to have a look at my collection that's there on my Pinterest board, you'll need to sign up for Pinterest if you don't already have an account. It's free and it's very, very worth it. It's a place where you can collect your own links and share them with other people, but of course you can just access all of my links there if you like. It's been the best way that I've found to share links to web pages and to videos. The second thing is kind of a follow-on from that one, and rather than just showing a straight YouTube video, there's a website called PlayPosit which allows you to make YouTube videos and other videos that you find online interactive. Now you can choose your video, you can add it to the PlayPosit website. You basically just copy and paste the link to the video, and that website allows you to add questions to the video. The questions will pop up during the video itself, so you press play, the video goes along, and it pauses when it gets to one of the questions that you've added into the video. It pauses so that students can actually answer the question, and they could discuss the answer as a group or in teams if you're doing this as a whole class activity. Also could work well as a substitute teacher activity. So if you're able to set up the video with the questions ahead of time, you could do that and then just leave the link on PlayPosit for the substitute teacher to come in and they could run that with the class. Now, I did mention PlayPosit in one of the previous episodes about formative assessment options, so I'll link to that as well if you want to hear a little bit more about that. Now, the third thing you can do with your single laptop is to use it to do notes of the staff with your students. For a number of years, I've been showing the Staff Wars game in my workshops, and it always goes down really well. Every time I show it, I think that perhaps everybody knows it by now and it's not going to be a new thing, but I still find teachers all the time that have not seen it before. So it's a fantastic one if you want to check that out. Now, they have a version that you can download for free onto your laptop, Mac or PC. And there's also an iPad app version as well, which is a paid app, but very much worth it, I think, to pay for that one if you need the iPad version. Now, if you're doing it with your whole class, of course, it's designed really for one student to come up and, identify the notes. Basically, what happens is that there's a staff showing on the screen and there's a spaceship underneath it. And when you press the start button, a note comes flying in from the right and you need to identify that by clicking on the note name, which is underneath the spaceship. If you get the note right, the spaceship will shoot the note and everything's good. And if you get the note wrong, you'll lose a life. And there's 3 lives that you need to lose. Pretty sure that I've also talked about this option in the iPad episode a bit earlier. And I also mentioned in that episode that I've made some scorecards up to use with Staff Wars, particularly if you're using this as an entire class activity. So using the scorecards means that you can get everyone involved. So even if there's just one person identifying the notes actually on the computer, whether it's you or another student, all the others can get involved by writing down their answers on the scorecards. The scorecards wasn't my original idea. I saw that mentioned, another teacher had devised that, and I took that idea and just made a version that everybody can download from my website. So if you're interested in that, again, I'll link to that in the show notes. The fourth way you can use your single laptop is what I call be a music producer. And this is where you can use something like the free online interactive website called Incredibox. And I know a lot of you have seen Incredibox before. It's one that always goes down really well with students and with teachers as well. And it's a website where you can basically create a beatboxing pattern, which also has vocals and stuff as well. And there are some kind of cool looking dudes on the screen. You drag a sound to each one of them and it builds up an arrangement which sounds really, really good. So I find that this is a great website for doing a lot of things. You can really scaffold what you do with this website so that it becomes meaningful. And you can use it to do things like introducing remixing or arranging. You could use it to talk about conducting. So you can basically line up a whole set of sounds on these guys on the screen, and there's 7 in total. Once I've lined them all up, I actually mute them all, and then you can press record and build an arrangement. So you can bring the guys in and out, stop them singing, start them singing, and create some sort of arrangement that way. So you could include, some aspect of talking about what a conductor does and how that works, and the fact that you now have an ensemble in front of you. You are the conductor and you're going to bring in your singers or make them stop singing at certain times. Now, I have a blog post that I've written about Incredibox, and that's got some details about the sorts of things you can do with that website, some suggested lesson plan ideas. So again, I'll link to that one in the notes as well. The next 3 ways that I'm going to suggest you can use your single laptop is to use some of the tools that are part of the Chrome Music Lab. Now, this is a free set of online music tools which are really great for the music classroom. Each part of the Chrome Music Lab, and there are a number of different sections that you can go to. Basically, when you go to that website, you'll see what's kind of like a menu, and you can click on each item in the menu and it will take you to a different interactive tool, and each of those interactive tools does something very specific. So I think it's a great way to again, tie in technology into something you're already doing in class. The first one of those tools that I wanted to mention is simply called Rhythm, and it's a website. Once you launch it, it's basically a web page where you can see a couple of animals up the top of the screen, and there's some very simple grid-like notation underneath them, and there's a play button. Once you press play, you'll see that the animals are playing the notation that's in the grid below. So clicking around on the screen in different places in the grid will change the rhythmic pattern, which is great. Now you could have students play along with the pattern that they're playing. So each of the different sounds could be represented by perhaps body percussion or classroom instruments that you have, and students could play along with one of the lines that they can see on the screen. You could have maybe one student come up and change the rhythmic pattern themselves, and then everyone can play the new rhythm that's on the screen. You could also divide students into groups and get them to play the rhythms just in a very small group, so perhaps with one student on each part. They could also maybe improvise new patterns away from the screen and then come back and replicate what they've devised themselves by showing you and clicking on the grid to create their rhythm up there. Now, the first screen that you see in the rhythm game is in a 3/4 metre, but you can click through and actually see different meters with different animals playing and different sounds. And there's a 4/4 metre, a 5/4 metre, and a 6/8 metre as well. So there's some good variety there. Allows you to tie in discussion about different meters and, of course, the different rhythms that are in each of those screens. Another one of the Chrome Music Lab resources is called the Oscillator. It's a great way to introduce sound synthesis, and you can use it to show students 4 different oscillator types: a square, sawtooth, triangle, and sine wave. So they can click and drag up and down on the screen to change the frequency. Now, when you look at the screen of the oscillator is actually represented by a really cute kind of cartoon-like character. They remind me a lot of the Mr. Men book characters, like Mr. Happy. So basically a round circle or a triangle for the triangle one, and so on. When you click and hold your mouse down, it will make this little guy sing at a certain frequency, and then when you drag the mouse up or down, it will change the frequency higher or lower. You could use this as a great tool for exploring the relationship between frequency and pitch. So you could choose one frequency at maybe a low level and then see if students can find the equivalent note an octave higher, for instance, and they could do that as a group or maybe individually by coming up to your laptop one at a time. The third Chrome Music Lab tool I'll mention is called the Melody Maker, and there are lots of other things inside the Chrome Music Lab, so I really do encourage you to explore the other things, but this Melody Maker is the last one I'll mention for this episode. And I like to think of it as a great stepping stone into using notation or even to using piano roll editors that you find in sequencing programs like GarageBand or Mixcraft or Soundtrap. The Melody Maker shows pitch and time, just like one of those piano roll editors does. So there are, it's kind of like some little dots on the screen, and if you click on one of those, it will add a note, which looks like a rectangle onto the screen. And if you click a little bit higher to the right, you'll add another note just after the first one that you added. You can click around and create just a really short melody. And for that reason, I think that it's a great thing as a stepping stone activity, as I mentioned earlier. So as a group, students could create a melody, and you might like to choose the key note as the starting note and then let them choose the other notes in the sequence. It gives you a chance to discuss as a group the characteristics of a good melody. So you might mention things like starting and ending on the keynote can be a strong way to write a melody. You could talk about things like notes moving by steps or leaps. You could talk about melodic contours and so on. Once you've decided the group melody together, you could get students to play it back on tuned percussion instruments or whichever instruments they've got at hand which are melodic. Or you could sing it perhaps using solfa or even made up lyrics. They could maybe then split up into smaller groups and see how many ways they can vary that melody by changing the tempo or the rhythm or time signature or note duration and so on. And then each of the groups could perform one or two of their variations for the others. So it can just slot in there. So using the computer just as part of that activity alongside some singing and playing. That's our first 7 ways done. After the break, we'll continue with the next 8 ways to use a single computer in the classroom. This episode of the Music Tech Teacher podcast is brought to you by the Midnight Music Community. The Midnight Music Community is an online space for music teachers who'd like help using technology in their music lessons. There are online courses, video tutorials, lesson plans, music tech news, and professional development certificates are provided for any training that you undertake. I'm inside the community every day, personally answering members' questions and sharing tips and ideas. The best thing is that you get to connect with hundreds of other music teachers just like you and share your own experiences and occasional music tech frustrations. For more information and a special joining price just for the listeners of this podcast, visit midnightmusic.com.au/podcast offer. That's midnightmusic.com.au/podcast offer. Before the break, we looked at 7 ways you can use your single computer with your music students. So let's continue on with the next lot of ideas. Number 8 is to use your computer as a musical timer. Now, I've used in the past a countdown timer on the Class Tools website, which is free. And this might be a good way to encourage students to do something like clean up the classroom really quickly for a specified time length. There are a number of different music themes and time lengths that you can choose in that Class Tools timer. Now, the one I really like is the Mission Impossible theme. I think it goes for a couple of minutes or so. Basically, you set it going and the students will see the countdown timer on the screen and they'll hear the Mission Impossible music. So that's a really good one for getting them to do something really fast, like clean up the classroom. The 9th way you could use your computer is to use it as a backing track for students to improvise along with. And there's a number of different ways you can do this. You could set something yourself up in a software program, but there's actually a little video that I've found which is nice, and it allows you to improvise using the pentatonic scale. This has been made by the Chamber Music Society of Detroit, and it's part of the New York University Music Experience Design Lab. It's just a really simple video with some nice piano music. I'll play you a little bit of it here. And if you set that going, you could have students play along with that. Now, they could use black notes on a keyboard if you've got access to those to use. The website's actually set up that you can even press the keys on your computer keyboard to play along with that video. So give that one a go. I think it works really nicely. It's a nice piano piece and it just allows students to be creative along with that video. Now, the 10th way to use your single computer is to use it to visualize dynamics. Or this could be actually general class noise. It doesn't have to be dynamics necessarily. There's a website called the Bouncy Balls website. And once you go there, you'll need to just click on the button which says that you will allow that website to use your microphone. Because what it does is it kind of listens through your microphone to sound that's going on in the environment. And basically it's a black screen with some balls down the bottom of the screen. And as soon as there's noise picked up through your microphone, the balls all start bouncing around. So if the noise is at a low level, the balls will bounce just a little bit. And if the noise is at a very high level, the balls go crazy all over the screen. So it's a really good way to, maybe if you're teaching dynamics to students, you could get them to make the balls stay very low for a piano sound, or get them to go crazy on the screen with forte or fortissimo. And it's kind of good. I know some teachers actually use it as a behavioural type thing where they just have that on in the background. And if the balls are moving around too much on the screen, the students know that they're being too noisy and they need to lower the levels of their talking or playing or whatever it is that they're doing. So give that one a go. Lots of fun. In the same sort of vein, you could use your laptop to visualize sound. Now, I've done this before where I've just simply opened up the free Audacity recording and editing software program. And Audacity's super simple to use. I've actually got some free tutorial videos if you want to get to know it a little bit more in depth. But even if you've never used it before, you could literally open it up and press the record button, and you'll see that the sound being picked up through your laptop microphone will show on the screen in a waveform. Now, this can be a great thing, to use just to record students singing and playing, of course, but you could also use the recorded waveform as a discussion about dynamics and form and rhythmic accents, because the students can actually see what's going on. You can really see where there are loud sections in the piece of music and where it drops away to softer sections, because the waveform gets very small. One thing that I've done in the past is to import existing recordings in a range of musical styles into Audacity so that you can visually compare what they look like. It's really funny to do this, because if you import a classical piece, say Mozart Symphony for instance, you'll see that there's a really big dynamic range in the waveform. So you can see big, loud, strong sections, and then it drops away to almost nothing, and then it might build up a little bit, and then it might go back to, a big sound again. But when you import something else like electronic dance music song, I've actually imported a Lady Gaga song just to have a look, and there's not much dynamic range in that one at all. It's basically a wall of sound from start to finish, which is not to say that it's the wrong thing or the bad thing, but it's just really interesting to compare. So you can compare different styles perhaps, and maybe even have some sort of guessing game where students need to guess what the style of music is before they hear it. You actually just show it on the screen, get them to guess what style of music it is, and then see if they're right by playing it back. Now, number 12 is to use your laptop as a metronome, and you can do this in a number of ways, and again, I've mentioned this in an earlier episode too. You can set up some sort of rhythmic backing on your laptop using a free website or whatever software that you have handy, and then students can play along to this, and instead of using a metronome. So rather than just having a boring tick-tock kind of sound, you can set up some sort of rhythmic backing for them to play along with. Now, if you've got GarageBand or Mixcraft or Logic or Soundtrap or any of those programs, you could do it quickly in there by maybe using an existing loop from the loop library, or playing something quickly to record yourself your own drum pattern from scratch. Or if you don't have one of those software programs, you could use a free website like BeatLab, which is a really simple online drum sequencer, and you basically click on squares to build up a drum beat there and press play, and you can set the tempo. So you could have students play along fast or slow, however you like. There's another online free drum machine called the HTML5 drum machine, HTML5. And again, you can just use that to set up a really quick drum beat too. Now, I've got a blog post that I've written called How to Make a Funky Beat in 30 Seconds, and I'll link that one in the show notes, because that's got some more detailed instructions on how to do that. Now, following on from that, with the rhythmic backing that you've got set up, you could then have students write a rap to go along with the backing. So this can be a really good activity to do in small groups or individually, but you could maybe talk about setting the backing up, and you could do that as a class perhaps, and then talk through and practice an example rap as a group with your one computer. And then students could go away and write their own original rap lyrics to go along with the backing, and then maybe come back and perform it using your laptop as the backing track. Now, there's a full lesson plan that I've created which shows you exactly how to do that, and it's got a suggested structure for the rap if you want to use that. Of course, students can do whatever they like. You might limit them to picking a specific subject or something, but I've got one which is called Rap My Name. So it's a rap which you create lyrics to do with something that you like, and there's all the instructions for that will be linked in the show notes. Another group activity that you can do is to use Audacity, which I mentioned earlier, the free recording and editing program. You could use that to create a class story where you have some narration, maybe some sound effects, and maybe some background music which will accompany the story. Now, if you've just got a single computer, you could do this as a whole class activity, and this would probably work best if you assign students to different roles. So you might have a group of students who are writers, you might have one group which are narrators, and they'll take turns in saying different parts of the story or speaking different character parts. And perhaps another group of students might think of some sound effects that you need for the story. They might work out how they can create those sound effects using instruments or body percussion. And maybe you might have another group creating background music. And once you've put all those things together, and this might take a lesson or two, you could then record the whole thing together in Audacity. You could also use GarageBand or one of those other digital audio workstation type software programs, but that works quite well. Of course, if you do have access to multiple devices, this can be a great small group activity where you have groups of maybe 3 or 4 students sharing in the roles of that story creation, and they can come back and do that and show you what they've created on individual laptops or iPads. But if you've just got the one laptop, this can be done as a big sort of class group activity. So this brings us to the last one, which is number 15, and this is to work as a group through an interactive story and accompanying activities. The one that I've picked here is the Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, and there's a website which is called the Carnegie Hall Listening Adventures site, and again I'll link to this in the show notes. You can go through that and actually work through this story about the Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. So that works well, just as a sort of an interactive listening activity. Again, it could be something that you use to set for a substitute teacher if you know that you're going to be away from class coming up sometime soon. But it works well, obviously, if you're there too. And that could lead into other things that you're doing surrounding that Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. I really hope you found some useful ideas in that lot of 15 ways that you can use a single laptop. And please let me know if you do try any of them out. You can connect with me on my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Midnight Music. Or if you visit the show notes page at midnightmusic.com.au/6, you can actually leave a comment on that page. So you can just comment at the bottom, and I read all of those comments and will reply if you've asked a question or something there. The Music Tech Teacher podcast is hosted by me, Katie Wardrobe. Don't forget to download the show notes from today's episode. And thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.